No relationship starts off physical. It starts off with mental abuse. It starts off with stalking. That was a night out to go eat dinner. We saw a mutual friend that we both had known since high school. And he actually came up to me, gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And I don't see anything wrong with that, and didn't see it as anything but that. And when we get into the car, he looked at me and he was like, make it the last time that you ever let someone do that to you again. I started noticing that he would go through my phone, or he would constantly want to check my friends list or my followings, my DMs. So it was just a progression. I fell in love with him, and when you fall in love with a person, you put on rose-colored glasses.
People kind of do that victim shame, I call it. Kind of like, well, you saw the red flags and things like that, where I tell the girls, this could happen to anyone. It's just crazy how much power this person could have over you. Like she said, like it's the love bombing phase. But then saying it's because I love you. And it's like, oh wow, no one could do that to me.
Well, hello. So a little about myself. I'm 38 years old. I am a single mother to 3 beautiful girls, one being 18. I have a 15-year-old and I have an almost 9-year-old. So I'm in home health. Yeah, I'm a marketer. I've been marketing for about, I'd say 8 years now that I've been marketing. So far so good. But yeah, that's a little about me.
Abby.
Hello, my name is Abby. Fun fact, or kind of funny that Abby's just the nickname. My full name is Optiana. But I grew up in Seattle. I moved a lot throughout my life. I turned the big 30 this year. That's another I don't know. I think life, just your mindset changes a lot throughout the time, or once you enter the 30s, I hear. So I'm in the finance world, banking, real estate, mortgage, all that fun stuff. No kids, not married, none of that. I do have pets, so pets are my kids. But yeah, I've known Elisa for a while now. I want to say 7-8 years.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what, 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah, 10 years that we've had. You've actually been...
Before you had your baby.
Before I had my baby. Yes, I was actually pregnant with my baby when I first met you. So
yeah, we like to keep our friendships for sure.
Yeah.
So this segment is not just talking about our lives now, but our lives previous and our relationship history and what we've experienced. Relationships have ups and downs, especially with a new relationship. You have to get to know that person. And then what happens next is you fall in love with that person. And then it's kind of like peeling the onion, right? Like you slowly, gradually get to know that person a little too well, and then you see the other side of them. So that's why we're here today. Hopefully we can educate our friends and our family and a lot of women out there on, what to look for, what to look out for, any red flags. Irene, tell us about it's been a long time. I think it was like 7-8 years ago that you've experienced, a toxic relationship.
Right.
That's just a vague way of saying it, but what happened? What happened in the worst part of it? Like, I think I do recall we had a lunch birthday party for you, and this is the first time I've heard about it. She was an hour late and she was not answering her phone, and we got worried because it's her party. You can't have a party without Irene. Yeah. And finally she showed up, even after an hour of not answering her phone. And unfortunately, she showed up with a black eye. And we were all in shock. And that's the first time, let us fill me in.
Right. So, when it comes to relationships, everyone is different, right? My first marriage was about 9 years. And in those 9 years, I got married at 19 years old, had my first baby at 19 years old. So what I knew love to be and marriage and commitment and relationship is what I knew it to be at 19 years old, which isn't very much, right? So again, those first 9 years, there was no domestic abuse. There was a lot of arguing. Mind you, 19 years old, we're kids. We grew up together. We just grew apart. And so that marriage ended. Then I met my second husband, who actually wasn't a stranger to me. He was someone that I have known for years, and I'm talking since elementary school.
Wow.
So it was easy to kind of dive into that. It was easy to, kind of reconnect, if you will. So what are we always looking for after we end a marriage or a relationship? You want to look for connection. You want to look for that spark again, right? And I did get that with him. In the beginning, it was literally like sparks. Like we connected
Honeymoon
right away. It
phase.
was the honeymoon phase, and it was great. At first. So going, into the relationship, I didn't really notice any red flags in the beginning just yet, because mind you, I didn't really know enough about this person to, to figure that out. At that point, I'm in the honeymoon phase. I'm having a good time. He's spoiling me and whatnot. It's not until I would say maybe about 3-4 months into the relationship where I got my first little dose of what that could look like. And that was a night out to go eat dinner. We saw a mutual friend that we both had known since high school. And he actually came up to me, gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. And, I don't see anything wrong with that, and didn't see it as anything but that.
And not really in your control.
Correct. So we went through the dinner. He actually ended up having dinner with us, and mind you, a very close friend to him as well. I kept trying to hold his hand. I kept trying to be affectionate with him. And then I just kind of noticed he would lean away from me, or he wouldn't, he would kind of move his hand away. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And so once we leave, this friend, he says goodbye, again, gives us hugs and gives me a kiss on the cheek, and he leaves. And when we get into the car, he looked at me and he was like, make it the last time that you ever let someone do that shit to you again. And I was taken by surprise, because not once had he ever spoken to me that way. So, of course, I was taken aback. And, where does your mind go? Your mind goes to, oh, my gosh, I've offended him, and I feel bad for it now. So he had a way of making me feel bad for something that was out of my control, right? So, of course, naturally, I apologized and told him that it would never happen again. So that was the first little dose that I got about 3 months into the relationship, that, I did notice that he had another side that I wasn't.
Before it turned physical?
Before it turned physical. I would say when it did start, so it started out, and no relationship starts off physical.
No.
It starts off with mental abuse. It starts off with stalking. I started noticing that he would go through my phone, or he would constantly want to check my friends list or my followings, my DMs, just constantly wanting to look through my things. And I'm like, okay, well, I have nothing to hide. I'm, here you go. But I noticed that was something consistent, but I couldn't do the same. That was kind of the weird part of it, is that I was constantly being accused of doing things with people. So it was just a progression, right? Starting there, of going through my phone and just disrespecting my privacy when there was no reason to do it in the beginning. And then from there, I would say about maybe 6-7 months into the relationship is when he first smacked me. And that was because, and then it's so funny, because when you think back on those things, mind you, this is 8 years. This has been over 8 years, and you forget those little details. You forget the whys, but you remember.
Like, how did we even get there?
How did we get to that point? So that was the first time that he did put his hands on me. And again, I didn't know that type of love. I didn't know that was, not right. It wasn't something that you shouldn't be doing. I thought at that point, emotions just got the best of him, and, I'm going to do better.
You gave him the benefit
of
the doubt.
I'm going to do better. Yeah, I'm going to give him the benefit of a doubt. I'm going to do better to not trigger him.
And because you loved him.
Correct.
Okay.
And because I fell in love with him. And, when you fall in love with a person, you put on rose-colored glasses. And you see them through these lenses, and you don't want to see the bad, because again, your mind goes back to the honeymoon phase. Your mind goes back to when things were great, And so, it came to a point where it became a common occurrence, going forward and towards that night of my birthday. And it was specifically for that reason, because I started getting isolated from my friends, from my family. There was even points where you and I didn't talk for long periods of time. And, I think our friendship has been so resilient that, sometimes we can go months without talking. But when we do, it's like we never stop talking, right?
Yeah, I think you were kind of embarrassed to tell anybody.
I was embarrassed. I was ashamed because anyone knowing this and being in an abusive relationship and coming to a point where you're just completely isolated from friends and family and anyone of support, you feel like you have no one.
Yeah.
But it was my outlet that night to finally just kind of get out and enjoy my birthday, you know what I mean, for what, because he wasn't going to do anything for me. So I was like, okay, like that's cool. I'm going to go out with my friends. And yeah, but before I left, again, it turned into an argument and, he didn't want me to go. And I was like, I'm going to go. And this time I'm like, I'm going to put my foot down and I'm going to go. I became the stern one and I was like, I'm going to go. But again, that wasn't allowed. And when I went to open the door, I got a fist to the face.
Wow.
And at that point, I wasn't going to stand there because I knew that if I stayed inside the house that I would be kept there. So I left. And unfortunately, I showed up like that to the birthday party.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So.
I think you told me about the last night that you left. And that's a crazy story.
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to compact 6.5 years of verbal and physical abuse and sexual abuse. It's really hard to do that because there's just so much that went on in that time frame that it's hard to compact it all because everything kind of comes back and it just flows through. And I want to say 100 different things at the same time, but you can't do that for time's sake, right? And this is, to be very clear, this is the first time in 8 years that I discussed this that was outside of close family or therapy. So that last night, and again, we're going to fast forward here through all the sexual abuse, all of the physical and mental abuse. And mind you, it went from verbal abuse to physical and then physical to sexual.
Just escalated.
It just escalated. Yeah, it escalated because the more that I allowed this type of behavior, the more that it escalated, and, he just came to a point where I think mentally, what more can I do to break her down? What more can I do for her?
The more you forgave him,
the more I forgave.
allowance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more that you forgive, the more they're going to do it. So going fast forwarding to that last night, and mind you, I was pregnant with my daughter, and then that wasn't actually the last night. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was actually living in an apartment on my own. I finally had, chosen to leave. And in the cycle of abuse with Stockholm syndrome and PTSD, it's not quick. You don't just decide one day that you're going to leave. You go back a few times. And I did. I went back in a 6.5 year marriage. Even with all of those, I went back a good 5-6 times. I did go back. And so while I was pregnant with our daughter, I did move to an apartment and, he would stalk me just to make sure that no one was there. And mind you, I'm pregnant. And he would still show up. He would just show up out of nowhere. And, and the way that I saw it, because of how manipulated I was and because of how broken down I really was as a person and as a woman, I allowed him to come back whenever he wanted, because as a pregnant person, I'm just, what? He's the father of my child. I'm by myself and I'm pregnant. If I can get a little bit of compassion, a little bit of love there, I accepted it.
Or connection.
Connection. And he'd give me a little bit of affection, a little bit of time, and then he'd go back to the girl that he left me for when I was pregnant with our, when I first found out I was pregnant with our daughter. So again, throughout pregnancy, that's how it was with him. He was not there the day that our daughter was born. And then again, just throughout that time, it was a constant back and forth, right? But moving forward and just, going back to that night that I did decide to leave, my daughter was I'd say about a year. She was about a year old. And we had just gotten back from a family party. This was his side of the family. And he was intoxicated. That night, we did get into an argument. Again, those details escape me because it wasn't big enough to escalate to that point, right? But it was big enough for him. In the car, he ended up punching me square in the face over an argument. and our daughter was in the back. I actually was knocked unconscious in the car. And then when we got to the house,
So you blacked out?
I blacked out completely. Yeah, I was completely unconscious. And when we got home, I remember waking up and just kind of looking around. And then he went, and mind you, our daughter was asleep in the back. He went around to the passenger door and he pulled me out and he literally dragged me by my hair inside the house. From there, all I could think about was my daughter, because she was in the car by herself. It's 12 o'clock at night. Like, can you leave her in there like that? But he did. He left her in there, and it was beyond my control. I could not run out there because he had me in a stronghold. At that point, he did drag me to the room, and he sexually assaulted me. He assaulted me in every degrading way that you can think of, to the point where after he sexually assaulted me, he beat me so bad that I passed out, that I blacked out.
Again.
Right, because he was choking me, and then, I was on the floor, and he would grab me by my hair and, hit my head on the floor.
Wow.
And so hitting the back of your head is just, it just came to a point where, because of how much I was feeling all the pain, and, I couldn't even just think about what was happening. It was happening all so fast that I couldn't even comprehend what was happening to me. I remember thinking I was going to die, and at that point I did black out. I think God gave me some grace, and I blacked out at that point. So when I finally did come out of that and I did, wake up, I was naked on the floor completely. I was bleeding everywhere. And I remember just getting up and whatever I can find, what wasn't ripped on the floor, I put my pants on, I found a shirt and I threw that on, and my main concern was my daughter. So I opened the door and I snuck down the hallway as quietly as I could, so mind you, he was drunk this night, so he was passed out, he couldn't hear me. And of course my daughter was asleep on him. And so I went as carefully as I could. I got her and went down the hallway back to the room, and I locked the door. We had a screen in the back window that I was able to get out, but it was a pretty steep drop, even though it wasn't a 2-story house, but in the backyard we have concrete. And so having my daughter in my arms, it was so hard to kind of get her out that we both ended up falling out of the window. I ended up hitting my head, but in doing that, she also got hurt, and she had a bloody lip from that. I grabbed her, and I remember she cried a little bit. I'm like, shh, just try to shush her as much as I could, just so he couldn't hear us. And I ran to the car. And at this point, it never crossed my mind to go to the police. And the reason why it didn't, and I think you can even remember an incident where I did call the police, and they never got to me. And so at that point, I remember you told me, just come up here, and I did. And there was many situations where I felt like, unfortunately, and I fully respect law enforcement, but they failed me in many, many ways. And so I felt like I couldn't go there. So I ended up going back to his family's house. In this sense, it was my ex-brother-in-law. And so I knock on the door, and I'm like, hey, like, this happened. And I let him know what had happened. And
this is like 2 a.m.?
This is about 2:30 in the morning. Yeah. So we get there, and, I told him, like, hey, I just need somewhere to sleep, somewhere to crash, so that, this happened to me. This is what he did, and this and that. And so at first he was empathetic, and, he gave me a blanket, and, he had me lay on the couch with my daughter. But of course it didn't end there. It didn't end there, because while his fiance was passed out and in the room, he started touching me inappropriately.
Gosh.
And just telling me, like, oh, don't worry, I will take care of you.
This is his brother.
This is his brother. Right. And he starts taking advantage of me, trying to take advantage of me. And at that point, I'm like, what do I do here? I got up and I left right away. And then I didn't have anywhere else to go, because, mind you, at this point, by this time, I was already isolated from my family. They weren't talking to me. I had no friends. I had completely isolated myself from everyone that cared about me. So I had nowhere to go. And again, I didn't think about going to
and
the
partly
cops.
because they didn't like him
Right.
and they thought you weren't listening.
Right. You know,
Yeah.
and I definitely see their point of view. But again, when you're in a situation like that and you've been gaslit, you've been manipulated, you've been, you know, just put through the ringer at that point, I had already lost who I was. So at that point, I had nowhere to go. So my daughter and I ended up sleeping in the park. And I did tell my ex-brother-in-law and my ex-sister-in-law, and I told them what happened. And that's when they told me, they were like, you know what? If you don't do something about this, we are. You need to go back to the hospital. And I did. I went to the hospital and I was there, and I was just from so much trauma and so much that was going on, and then dealing with what had just happened to me again, this time with an extended family member of his.
Did you have to seek shelter?
I did. So waking up in the hospital, and my daughter had actually gone to my family at that point, and you know, I woke up, and at that point it just wasn't worth it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to think that my daughter was in the other room or she was trapped in the car while all of this was happening to me, and it was, you know, I had no control at that point. So how am I going to protect my child?
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I made a decision that, you know, I would never let that happen again, you know, and mind you, I have nothing at this point. I have nowhere to go. I don't have a car. I don't, you know, I don't have any money. So I did, you know, with my police report and, you know, stuff like, I did end up going to Crisis House in El Cajon. It's in San Diego. And through Crisis House, they did help me. They gave me a voucher so I can stay in a hotel. At that point, I was able to, you know, my two oldest daughters, I had just had them stay with my family. You know, I asked them, please just take them in, and I'll keep my little one with me, so that I wasn't alone either. And we stayed in a hotel for about a week or two. The same agency helped me to find, they helped me find my condo. They helped with 1 to 2 months worth of rent, and then from there, like, hey, like, you're gonna have to take it from here.
Yeah.
And so I was also court ordered to go to therapy.
Yeah.
So I was in intense therapy for a very, very long time because I was diagnosed PTSD. I had Stockholm syndrome, and so I had to do the work to really, you know, take myself out of that situation because it was hard.
You had to get healthy again.
Right. And even then, you just come to a point when you don't have anything, it is easy to go back because you have a home. At least you have somewhere that you can go, you know, and it's the quiet nights. It's when you finally have that quiet time to yourself where you start to reflect on everything that's happened, you know, and that's a tough time.
Yeah.
That's where the real work begins, is when you finally have quiet and you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So
that's very sad. I just heard that story last week, and I feel like a lot of women that go through domestic violence just keep it to themselves. And but Abby, are you comfortable with telling us? I've met your guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a facade, and we stood by you, all of your friends, you know, whether you're happy or not. We had no choice because that's what friends do. We stand by you as long as you're happy. But deep down inside, you know, you were going through some things, and now it just surfaced.
mm-hmm.
So, you know, share with us what you feel comfortable.
Sorry, it's so recent. Well, this
Very
just happened.
recent.
Yeah, what is it? May 18th?
Yeah.
You know, so I give you props, you know, it's not easy. I related to a lot of the things she was saying. Thank God I did not have kids with them, because I was like, that would have been so, you know, tough on me. You know, tomorrow we have court, which is, remember, I was like, well, that's funny.
It's not even over.
Yeah, no, it's not. So tomorrow, you know, it's court again, you know, seeing him again. You know, with this one, how would I say it? You know, people kind of do that victim shame, I call it, you know, kind of like, well, you saw the red flags, you should have, you know, and things like that, where I tell the girls, I'm like, this could happen to anyone, you know. It could be the most smartest, the you know, prettiest, it could be the one that's not. It's just crazy how much power this person could have over you. And, it's like she said, like it's the love bombing phase. It's the, oh, and then saying it's because I love you. And it's like, oh, wow, you never really see the bad. And like she said, it's always, the first scenario. And I wish, and I look back and I'm like, I wish I would have just walked away if I knew, or, but I'm like, no one could do that to me, like you tell yourself, like, I would never be that girl, you just don't expect it to be like that, because you hold on to so much of the good things and how that person makes you feel, and how, we
Their potential.
yeah, and it's a lot of love bombing. I was listening to another podcast. They want to be with you 24/7. We moved in together really quick. He was like my glue. I call him my glue, like literally my, but so early in the stage where it's like, oh wow, like you must really, I was like, never thought of it, but it started, there was a night very similar to kind of what happened to Irene. We were at a football party, and it was one of my close friends, and it's just a lot of guys. They're all loan officers, mortgage, everything. So the ratio is very like minimum. I think it's only like, I think 4 girls or so, and and Meister is a little different, kind of. He has a girlfriend, so it's kind of like an overseas girlfriend, so there's like a little triangle between us. There was an altercation before we left to the party, and that's just a whole different thing. But I was being a little distant, but also, like she said, they pull you away from your friends. Then the girls would be like, well, we just want girls time, and and so I just didn't hang out with my friends anymore. I didn't see them. I didn't. So when we were there at the football party, all I wanted to do was catch up with them, like, and he was just always like, hey, like, come over here, etc. So of course, drinks involved, he gets more aggressive. He has an anger issue, or anger, what is it, temper, or a bad temper.
Especially with alcohol?
Even worse with alcohol. Like that, he goes even more. And then we add, you've seen him. He does boxing, MMA. He's very big on that. Steroids being added, it makes him even more.
Yeah.
So that night, I was being distant with him, and same thing. I was saying hi to my guy friends, like, hey, how's work? I'm not working at this mortgage company. I'm here. And he took it as disrespectful, that I made him look dumb, that I didn't, all this stuff. And, but that didn't come out till after in the car. So I didn't drink that much that night, and he was super intoxicated. And I was like, okay, let's go. And I remember I tried to grab his arm, and he's like, don't touch me, and push me, and I'm like, whoa, like, what was that for, And then I was like, okay. He's like, you're, starts yelling. And my friend here, she's like, and I'm like, he's just drunk, just ignore him. Because, we always blame it on something, and I never been in this type of relationship. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I did piss him off, Well, we get in the car, and, I put the maps on, and I've never, ever been yelled at in my life how this one, and he's a tough, big guy. Irene has got to see him. He's like, you fucking hoe, like just yelling, and I'm driving. Okay, we're on the freeway. Anaheim to Irvine is like 30 minutes. And I'm just, I'm bawling, crying. I'm like, why? I was just so shocked. And he's like banging the door, and then I'm just like, okay, do I need to pull over? Like, I'm like, I'm just trying to get us home safe, say something. And I'm like, oh my God, like, I'm just, and I remember when I got home, he starts laughing, and
just like a switch.
Yeah, literally. But me over here, when he tells me, he's like, I'm sorry, like, I won't do that again. Then they come down to earth, right? Apparently, supposedly, and apologize and start saying, and, of course, starts just verbal, the yelling, the insults, and he's like, I won't do this again. Valentine's Day is coming up. I promise, things like that. Okay. I'm just drunk, blah, blah, blah. And it just starts like that. It's like a pattern. And like Irene says, I'll keep it short or so, but and this for me was just 2 years in the relationship.
Wow.
But I saw my mom come out of a marriage with violence. So I was like, if my mom was able to do that, I'm not going to tolerate, But I think he didn't hit me, right? That's another thing. He didn't hit me. It's okay. He says he's sorry. But the more, like Irene says, the more you start, then we lived together, the more I started being more firm. You walk out those doors, you're single. Okay, bye. That's when it got worse. And that's when and he's not dumb. And the thing with him is he has had domestic violence in the past with the wife that I didn't know till I had to take it to court. So, it starts like that. And like Irene says, the more you start putting your foot down, and then California has this, you can't kick anybody out of your home, even if they're not on the lease. And it's so dumb. So I had to keep the peace with him. And it's just, there's more to it, but, how would I say it? But, and eventually started getting more violent, started getting to the shoving, the pushing. And then one night, he just lifted his fist, and I was like, I know one day you're just going to lose it and you're going to do it. And I can't, like, I'm not going to, and everybody's like, you would have been like broken nose or, cause he's big. And I'm like, and that was just, I don't know how to say it. It's very I mean, I don't have enemies or anything like that, but I always tell the girls, like, I never want any of you guys to ever go through anything, because it's not just the physical. I always think, or I say now that it's the mental, the verbal. They break you down to you think like no one's gonna love you, no one's oh, you're right, no one's gonna, you start really, and that's what it is. And he's a narcissist, so that even adds, I don't know, I think a lot of domestic violence men or guys that are in that are very narcissistic.
Yeah,
they
tends to be the pinnacle of an abuser.
Yeah,
because they're controlling.
Is to be controlling and to be narcissistic. And to her point, as far as the victim blaming, I 100% agree with that. Unfortunately, in the state of California, they scrutinize the victim more than the abuser. Yeah. And the way that they do that is, I was the one that was under a microscope with CPS and my children being taken away because I allowed that abuse to happen to me. So I was the one that was court ordered to go to therapy. I was the one that had to jump these hoops to ensure that I was going to keep my children safe because I was the one being beaten. And so to her point again, as far as, in the state of California, you can get a move out order or restraining order, which I got. It didn't mean that he was going to leave. So guess what? I had to leave.
Yeah.
So it's a unfortunate thing that we live, in a judicial system that really does go against the victims. It really does. You're the one that gets scrutinized. And like she said, you should have seen the red flags. You should have seen these things. Well, unfortunately, when you're dealing with someone who is a narcissist and someone that's going to break you down to your absolute lowest, right? When you do that, then they know that they have absolute control and that there's nothing that they can do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then also with these narcissists is they like to tell people, when you tell a lie enough times, people will start to believe it. So you feel helpless in that sense because they're telling people their side of the story while you're made to look like the absolute worst person in the world.
Yeah.
And threats.
Yeah.
This one will make threats.
That's why you had to get a restraining order?
Well, we got it after the EPO, which is the emergency protection order. Because the cop's like, well, he's going to come back after this, if you don't. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I knew he was going to be upset. He spent 3 nights in jail. He spent his birthday in jail. So I'm like, he's going to be even more pissed off. And and I went and I got the temporary restraining order. Then I had to inquire with the lawyer because, I'm like, this guy is going to lie. He's going to flip, I already know him because he calls all his exes crazy. And now the funny story is I'm really close with one of his exes, and
we got to meet her.
Yeah, I reached out to one of his exes. I'm like, how did you survive? Like, you were with him for 70, and she's like, no, it was 4 years of hell. And I'm like, oh wow.
But she validated everything.
Yeah, and I thank her so much, because I think, because a lot of people walk away from you, friends and family, and you isolate yourself, and and how do I say it? There's a part of you that wants your close people to know or know how you feel, but at the same time, it's I understand it's draining, but a lot of times they just distance themselves, and they don't know that when they do that, maybe not doing it maliciously, but it isolates you more. It makes you even more hopeless,
and you're not, I feel like you're not feeling the support that you in turn would give them.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not mutual.
Yeah. So it's
especially if it's been repetitive.
Yeah.
If it's been repetitive, then it does. And I've become one of those people where if it's repetitive over and over and over again, you do come to a point where, the people who are trying to help you and to be there for you just reach a point where they're like, what do you want me to do for you?
Yeah.
If you can't see what is happening here, and you're tolerating this, and, it's coming to a point where he's going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a gun in my face. I've woken up to a knife in my throat. These are all things that, looking back on it today, I'm even surprised that I'm still here.
Yeah. And we're glad that yours didn't escalate to a weapon in your face, right?
Yeah.
But it could have. That's the point, is that, she realized the escalation, and I'm so glad that you did. And you're right, as far as, having children and things like that, my mindset was I wanted to keep my family together. I had one failed marriage. I wanted to keep this one going. I wanted my family, essentially. So I put up with a lot of things that I shouldn't have.
You wanted to make it work.
I wanted to make it work, at least for them. But I can tell you right now that there are, no matter how many children that you have, that's not a situation that you want to be in. And it's not worth losing yourself, and not worth losing, and even then, potentially leaving your children motherless.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any advice, Abby, for the women out there? What signs to look for?
I don't know if have you seen It Ends With Us?
Not yet. I want
that
to.
That movie is such, have you seen it?
No.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, it's such, it literally shows you how it goes from. But one of the things that I, now I go to therapy, and, I try to, because, I have the PTSD, the anxiety, I'm always alert. I had to do the relocation. We're doing the safe at home, so he won't know. And it's just, just to keep you, peace of mind. Mm-hmm. My therapist is like, even if you move out of state, your problems are still, Right. And so, one of the things that, with the therapist, and I noticed too, I think their temper. That
pay attention
even
to
in
their
the movie
temper
too, the guy has a bad temper in the beginning, and that's how it starts escalating. Blaming it on the temper, on the anger, out of, it's, you guys got to watch it, but that movie gives you great, like, I relate to it so much, because that's how it starts. It goes in this little love bombing kind of, and then it's like, oh, he's just mad, that's normal. And then that's when you start the controlling, the jealousy. They start isolating you. You start kind of denying, like, what's the truth. You don't know what's the truth or not, so for me, I think, and I told the therapist, I'm like, I think temper for me is going to be the way they talk to me when they're mad. They start being aggressive, as calling me names. Like, none of my exes have ever done that. So I'm like, wow, like, who are you? But, I'm like, wow, I must have really offended you. Like, I'm so sorry. I used to cry and beg when he would want to leave and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then he will record it and then threaten me with it. That's a narcissistic, it's a reactive abuse to it.
Yeah.
So I think for me, temper is my biggest. I think be on, alert, or just see how they react when you guys
I do remember that, not just in domestic violence, but if you're looking, somebody said, if you're looking for a healthy relationship, you need to pay attention to their emotional
They're aggressive.
regulation. Like, can they regulate their emotions?
Yeah.
Do they have control over their emotions? And if they don't, then you're just diving into a toxic relationship.
Yeah.
Because it's going to drive you just as crazy.
Yeah, especially when you're not on that, when you have love bombing in a relationship, or you've been in a physically abusive relationship, it's hard to see those things. It's hard to recognize what's healthy and what's not healthy, right? So, any women or girls out there, and I say girls because, I have an 18-year-old, I have a 15-year-old that show me TikToks of young girls, saying, if I don't have this type of love, I don't want it. And it's literally boys being abusive. Like, I'm going to have my bitch this way. And it's not, oh, if he's not like that with me, then I don't want it. Again, my advice to girls like that is you don't want that. Because not only do you lose your self-worth and your identity because you're so busy catering to this person, you're essentially losing yourself. And once you've lost yourself, it's so hard to pull yourself out of that. And I went through intense therapy for over 7 years. 7 years of intensive therapy and healing through this process. And the women that are in an abusive situation now, and it's physically and mentally and even sexually abusive, have an exit plan. Because she's right. When you reach a point where you're going to put your foot down and you become stern enough to want to leave the situation, that means you're taking power away from them. And when you take power and control away, that drives them crazy, and they will do things like what happened to me that last night.
Yeah.
So I always say, have an exit plan. Make sure that you know what you're going to do to get yourself out of that situation, even if you have nowhere to go. And if you have a good friend to call your friend.
Yes.
You were one of those people for me.
I hear that's the most dangerous part of the relationship is when you try to leave.
Yeah, it is the most dangerous part. And, the number one, danger, for women that is not health related is domestic violence and being murdered at the hands of a partner.
Because they just don't want you to leave.
They don't want you to leave. They don't want to let go of that control. They could be cheating on you. They could be doing things behind your back. But if they don't have that control over you, it's game over. At that point, we've seen cases like the Ali case, the one that, killed his wife in downtown San Diego, and he wanted to maintain that control. And he had this attitude, if I can't have you, no one else will. And he went and he killed her and a very good friend of hers that was just there for her to help her. Wow. So again, my advice is have an exit plan. My advice is recognize these things.
Seek help.
Seek help for what it is. Therapy helped me tremendously. When you get to a point and you've healed enough that you can tell a story like mine, and that's just surface level of the things that were done to me. Yeah. And you don't cry about it. Yeah. You've healed. And
I feel like you guys, the women out there should not, the reason why they don't talk to friends or reach out for help is because they're embarrassed. Right. And I feel like your safety is more important than.
And you would think that, but again, no one logically wants to think that this person can kill you. No one wants to think that this person would ever come to a point, because you start thinking you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Yeah. You're not going to have a life out here. But when you act on emotion, and again, there's even a term for that. They call it a crime of passion these days, which warrants a lesser sentence, which I think is ridiculous. So again, I feel like even the court systems are just packed against you in that sense, right? Yeah. But again, when healing is key. Being able to heal from the trauma, being able to heal from those things, and and of course, even 8 years later for me, this is recent for her. So she's going through the process and she's doing the right thing.
And I think, Abby, you felt more comfortable telling your friends because ultimately you realized that it's not your fault. So how can your friends judge you when, this happened to you? Like, he did it to you. You didn't ask for it. So,
right. Those are things that are just beyond your control. Yeah. And even 8 years later, the way that it affects me, even 8 years later in life, is I'm very hyper aware. I'm very action based. So your actions have to match your words. And that is because of the trauma.
Yeah.
I will meet someone new and I'm always apprehensive at first because I don't know what your intentions are. So you become hyper aware, as you heal.
Unfortunately,
love
yes, makes you weak.
It does. It does.
Because that's sorry to interrupt, but they do a lot of narcissistic specifically, because usually that's what they are mainly, most of the time, not always. They keep a lot of false promises.
Right.
I promise I'm gonna change, and you're like, I promise, like, like, oh my god, because and that's, it's like actions do more, and so true, because that's a lot of the cases I was reading, it was a lot of holding on to hope, because they were saying, and I was listening to other girls' stories, like, why, what, or like, like typical question, like, what made you stay? Well, he would say he was going to change, or he said sorry, or it's a lot of, so now it's actions. But yeah, I agree with Irene. It's like, no, it's not just talk, it's do it. And then
and be very well aware of your boundaries. Have boundaries, that
what you're going to
tolerate and what you're not going to tolerate, and that's okay. That's okay, because when you reach a point and you've healed enough, you don't mind being the villain in their story because they refuse to do the work to heal.
Because you stood up for yourself.
Because you stood up for yourself, and you chose to, you made a choice to heal and to not tolerate that behavior moving forward ever again in any relationship.
Yeah, and they'll figure it out later that it was toxic because of them.
Of course. Well, not with the narcissist. With the narcissist, unfortunately, they just find a new supply.
Yep.
Oh, just like
that. They
like
find
what Abby said. It just rolls over into,
into another girl. You know what I mean? Another person. But typically narcissists like to go after stronger women. Yeah. Mentally stronger women, or women who have things going for themselves, because that to them, that validates them. That gives them that energy. It's a challenge. You know what I mean? And once they have that and they've broken you down, there's no use for you anymore. That's when the abuse gets the worst.
Yeah.
So that's what I always say, that when you do the work for yourself, and always remember to love yourself. Look for signs if they consistently looking through your phone, if they're doing things to stalk you, to control you. My ex-husband would even go as far as hiding phones and hiding things in the house to hear whatever was going on. And just, just to see if I would bring anyone else home, which wasn't the case because it was him bringing people home. So again,
do you think he was like that because he was doing the action and was afraid that you were doing the same?
Yeah.
How about Chris? I mean,
it's okay. It's okay.
How about your guy?
That's his short name. He was, I had to block certain people on Instagram. He was very, there was one time, an altercation where I couldn't be friendly. I couldn't even say hi to men in the bar, or just like a waiter or anything like that. It was all eyes on him. If a waiter came to the table, I couldn't talk, because if not, it was... Even
if you introduced, like, this is...
Yep. I remember one time we were Goat Hill or so, and one of his friends, and I'm very like, hey, like, how are you? Or, like, hey, do you want to drink? Why are you being so nice to him? Why are you sitting next to him? And it just got in this whole, like, where I was like, oh my God, I can't even look anywhere, I couldn't. We would be at the bar. What are you looking at? You're looking at those guys. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm looking at the clock. Things like that. And it was walking on eggshells, literally.
And you didn't disregard him. You were just like, hand to hand with him.
And I mean, with him, it was mainly, he never took my phone exactly. It was, he would go through my followers. He's like, who's this guy? Why are you following this one? Who's this? Block this. Or, I don't like this guy. Block him. I'm like, all right, let me, that was his way. And just the other, when we were in person, why'd you smile at that guy? I'm like, he was the waiter, little things like that where it's like, oh my God.
Remember that brunch? We had a brunch and it was girls.
And
she was so nervous. She was talking to him on the phone. She goes, Eloisa, please do me a favor. Talk to him. Tell him da-da-da-da-da. So then I kind of knew what to do. So I said, hey, how are you? Where are you? Are you coming to join us? Because they like to feel included. If they don't feel included, then that's when you're like tippy-toeing. So I tried to make him feel like, oh, how come you're not here? Da-da-da. And then he calmed down. So thank God.
But the fact that you had to do that just to spare her, like, can you imagine that? Had you not done that? Had you not done that?
I was worried after that. I'm like, wow, you can't even... Like,
Yeah.
And especially when you have that person living in your house.
yeah.
I was like, oh my God, you know, and in this dumb California law where it's like, even if they're not on the lease, but as long as they have mail getting there
Yeah.
and their car is there, and even though the apartment's
Clothes.
you know, you
Similar to
can't kick them
squatters'
out.
laws.
Yeah. So I imagine it's like I had to have him, you know, it's a crazy, I don't know, it's another thing that has to change too in those cases.
Yeah.
So
you know?
would you say it's not really finding the strength to leave, but what would you call it if it wasn't the strength? It was just like a final breaking point, or were you scared for your life, or what point did you have to get to finally cut it off?
I think, unfortunately, that it's different for everyone. I think for everyone has different trigger
I think yours
points.
was safety.
Mine was safety. Mine was
kids.
looking at my daughter and not knowing where she was. That was essentially my trigger. And like I said, everybody's different, and you're not going to get it right all the time. You have to give yourself grace, because even after that relationship, I did have a couple other relationships after that weren't very good. And you
Yeah.
actually witnessed that with my, you know,
Yeah.
I was in a 4-year relationship where it was off and on, and you would see the voicemails that he would leave me. And it was a pattern all over again, where it started off verbal, and then progressively it started to get a little bit more physical, pushing and grabbing and things like that. So at that point, that's when I ended that relationship.
You're like, wow, this is too
Right.
familiar.
It was so familiar. I was already getting flashbacks, my PTSD. And mind you, these are men that know what you've been through. These are men that you open up and you tell them, look, I went through this before. These are my boundaries. And, you know, essentially you give them a blueprint, right?
Please be
don't
different.
hurt me.
Yeah.
You know, please don't put your hands on me. You know, if you don't need to yell at me, you can talk to me like a person, you know? So again, give yourself grace, because you're not going to get it right away. You know, you have to heal yourself fully, you know, so that you can recognize these things. And like
So
I said,
for your
just give
daughter's
yourself
safety,
grace.
because sometimes abusive husbands turn into abusive dads. So I think you saved your daughter.
I did, you know, and again, I say unfortunately for him, not unfortunately for me, for him, because he gets to miss out on what an amazing little girl she is. He's the one that gets to miss out on that. It took for him to violate, you know, the first mother of his kids in front of my daughter, for court to finally side with me, because again, even a narcissistic abuser will get rights to his own child, and they will get visitation. I went through that. I cried all the time. I didn't want her to be with him. And sure enough, his patterns came back. And this time it worked in my favor, because at that point I get a phone call from CPS. And mind you, I'm still in therapy at this time. Go file an emergency ex parte and get full custody of your daughter. I did that, and here we are almost 8 years later, and he has had no contact with her whatsoever. Or me.
Yeah. What's court tomorrow? Is it finalization or?
Kinda. It's more it's a continuance, they call it. We're gonna go, I believe it's a motion for the expenses, the lawyer fees and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's
I really like how they helped you move, you know, your
Yeah, the
moving costs and
relocation.
relocate. I didn't even know that was available. So
No, it took me 3 calls to the cops, you know?
Yeah.
The first cops, and I'm a big law enforcement. I mean, I mainly dated a lot of law enforcement, except this one wasn't law enforcement. But it, you know, there's a lot of cases, you know, I like everything. There's good cops and bad cops. The first time I called the cops, I want to say they gave him more the benefit. They didn't believe me. They believed him more. He was intoxicated. They wanted to give him his car keys. I'm like, do you guys not see how drunk he, you know,
believe
is?
him? Like, did he say that you hurt him or?
No, they didn't think it was like an escalation. Like,
Oh.
you know, it's a typical, you don't have any bruises on your face. You might have bruises here, but you could just, you know.
It's like
things
your word against his.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and so then that was the first time cops were more on his side, you know, trying to give him the keys and just whatever. Second time, you know, they actually were like, hey, can we come in, you know, and And that's when they kind of, but it was more of a calming down the situation. The third time was when it just, of course, things were smashed everywhere, blood, bruises, everything. And it was the same cops that came the second time. And I think they knew, or they saw this. I don't know. I think that they were like, something's going on. We got to, like, can we walk in? The first cops were just by the door, like, they just took it like nothing, like it was just an argument. But it was like, no. But, the second time the cops came, they're like, can we come in? Like, what's going on? And they actually, because I'm like, oh, no, everything's fine. You guys could go. No, they actually took a little bit more, like, can we come? I'm like, okay, fine. Then the third time was when, things got blown out. So it takes time. But I think for me, how would I say it? Like Irene says, it takes some time to realize, when to walk away. For me, he never punched me in the face or anything like that. But for me, that was my, you're not going to do that. I'm going to stop this before we get to that. Because he would say, whenever we would argue, and he would lose his temper, you want me to hit you? And I'm like, no, like, I'm like, are you okay? So that
Why are
night,
you even saying that?
Yeah, that night that he lifted his fist and he stood there like thinking, like contemplating, like, should I not? And I was like, do I dare you, and that's when I'm like, one day he's just gonna, and I'm not gonna let
I can't believe you
happen.
said that.
Yeah.
I dare you.
No, yeah, I would say that to him, and he would just stare at me and like, wow, you're not scared, like, I'm like, do it. I'm like, and so for me, that was my, like, no, but it's a crazy
Yeah, yours is still so fresh.
yeah, I remember
So
she
fresh.
wanted me to do it. I was telling Irene, I'm like, no, can we like wait? And then she told me you were doing it. I'm like, okay, I'll feel a little better if someone else does it, because mine's still what, 3 months ago or so.
Yeah, I'm like, when you're ready,
Yeah, so-
because there's probably a lot of women out there that are going through this and they're just like at wit's end, and they really don't know what to do or what the next step is. But like movies, that movie that just came out, that's really insightful. And then I think on Netflix, My Worst Ex Ever.
I saw
that one.
I
So
did see that one.
There's one incident where
It's that
she
first
tried to
one.
leave. Yeah.
That first one is the one that gave me it triggered me for sure. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's a lot of that I went through.
Yeah.
A lot of that.
Could have been worse, right?
Yeah, I like to say, how would I say it? Like, now I understand why they say you're not alone, kind of thing. It's like, I hear stories and, and you feel like it's not possible to get out or be able to, but you can. It's just sometimes you might have to do it all on your own. You're not going to have the support from people around you. You're just going to have to pick up and just go for it. I remember I was telling the lawyer, I'm like, I don't want to press charges. Like, I'm worried, she's like, we got to do this. Like, we got to have something to protect you in case, it takes a lot, but sometimes you gotta have to just, it is possible, and I think listening to other stories or just, hearing documentaries and seeing how they overcame it, it should, and I hope it helps other, like young women or just girls, and and I tell my story to my friends. I'm like, no, like, learn from me, or like, like, and things like that. But I want to say it is possible. You can, and it might take you a while, but you'll get there.
And because you walked away, that's why you guys are here today. So thank you again for sharing your stories. I know it was hard. Even though it happened last month, yours happened 8 years ago. You describe it as if it happened yesterday. So I know how damaging it could be. It sounds like it, the way you speak about it. So hopefully we helped a lot of people today. And thank you again for coming. Next time, maybe you'll come and we'll talk about fun stuff.
Yeah.
Now that we're out of the woods.
Much better.
Yeah.
We'll be out of the woods
Let's get to the
soon.
good stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's funny. That's true.